When around 10, I found a $50 note in the school's ground. 10 years old me got very happy. $50 was a lot of money. But another kid saw me picking up the note. He came to me and said I had to give him half of the money, or he would tell the principal he saw me stealing the money. So, in order to not give this little piece of shit anything, I just went directly into the principal's office and said I found the money, told her where, and left. The kid pissed at me for doing that, told everyone, and they made fun of me for giving up the money. Everyone made fun of me for that matter, even a big part of my family. Except my mom, who was incredibly proud for what I've had done. I never told anyone the only reason I didn't keep the money was because that little shit blackmailed me. But seeing how proud of me she was for doing the right thing, and how hard it is to do it, made me the honest man I am today. At about 10 years old, my mother was vacuuming and my sister and I kidnapped ourselves and hid in a bedroom after leaving a note for my mom to bring 2 slices of cheese if you want to see your kids again. She brought them. Finding out I got selected for an internship with NASA. Back in high school with my girlfriend at the time in the back of my car on a random side road. Not having sex but being naked and holding each other and laughing. Boating with my family when I was a kid. I miss being on the water. Setting off fireworks in the street when one tipped over and was firing at me and my family. It was like time slowed down as we ran, and I remember them flying right in front of me, and a spark hitting my leg at one point. And my mother freaking out while I thought it was awesome. I went to an ice cream shop with my dad when I was little. In front of us was a mother and her son, a bit younger than me, who had just ordered a cone. She handed it to the boy, and he dropped it. He started crying immediately, and she had the most loving and comforting voice that everything would be okay, that these things happen. She cleaned him up the floor and got another cone without 1 ounce of bitterness. I looked at my dad's face, and he had envy and hurt in his eyes. A few months prior, that situation had happened with my brother and mom, and she yelled at him for the ride home for dropping his food while he cried. It really impacted the type of person I wanted to be, for myself and for my father. A few years ago, my father brought that moment up to me as a turning point in his life as well. Teenage years, when I had miscarried a baby I didn't even know I was carrying. I was at a very low point for a lot of reasons in those few months, and for about a month after I was a wreck. I decided to change for the better, with a new set of friends that I still love today, a career choice that I am happy with, and taking better care of my health mentally and physically. I'm sure there are plenty of others, but those 2 are pivotal points in my life. I was 15 and at a party in a park on the edge of the city, so there were fields on one side of the park. Anyway, the police come and our sound just telling us to keep the noise down. We know you are drinking it set. Obviously, people don't quiet down as we are all underage and drunk, so the police come back. As soon as that poor first soul is placed in the police car, people GTFO. 40 to 50 drunk adolescents bolt in all directions into the fields. Eventually, I stop at a bush occupied by an attractive girl. We end up kissing and dry humping for ages, until her friends eventually find us and tell her they are leaving. And here is the part that was really burned into my memory. This girl doesn't want to go and is telling her friends to leave without her, and then her friend said, "Come on, we need to leave. He's fat anyway." And that seemed to convince her, and off she went. Chronological order, kind of pissed how much sad there is here. Sitting on the stairs hearing my parents argue in the lead up to their divorce when I was 8. Felt like everything was crashing down. Watching WW2 documentaries and eating ginger nut biscuits with my granddad a few months later well past my bedtime. Those nights shaped me. Meeting my stepdad for the first time. He gave me his Sennies in a gray plastic box. I still have it, and it still works. Sitting with my mum, as she explained her Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and how she needed me to help her now. Everything in my life shattered for a second time. Falling in love for the first time to a girl in my English class in year 10. For the first time in quite a while, I thought I could open up. The relief was something else. Crying my eyes out 6 months later when she finally broke down and told me she'd only gone out with me as a dare. Let me tell you, that shit breeds trust issues. My dyspraxia diagnosis, finally an answer to so many questions. Leaving school for the final time and realizing I was free from all the people I couldn't trust. The loneliness hurt, but I'm better for it. The growing cold in my arms as I held my cat Tango after he was put to sleep. 19 years of companionship done. I can still hear his last breath in my mind clear as day. I was determined to be there at the end as he was there for me during all my troubles. I took him home, and I dug the hole myself, 6 feet deep. I decided that now he was gone, I didn't want to be alone anymore. Sitting in the middle of a field 3,000 miles away from England in the middle of Pennsylvania, surrounded by people I'd met through the internet, raising my beer to my lips and thinking about how I'd be storming the beaches of Normandy in a massive paintball game with them come morning. Looking down at my shirt with our little symbol on it and looking around at everyone wearing the same. Yeah, that was a good feeling. I'm determined to have more happy memories the next time this question comes around. Chronological order. Kind of pissed how much sad there is here. sitting on the stairs hearing my parents argue in the lead up to their divorce when I was 8. Felt like everything was crashing down. Watching WW2 documentaries and eating ginger nut biscuits with my granddad a few months later well past my bedtime. Those nights shaped me. Meeting my stepdad for the first time. He gave me his Senes in a gray plastic box. I still have it, and it still works. Sitting with my mum, as she explained her Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and how she needed me to help her now. Everything in my life shattered for a second time. Falling in love for the first time to a girl in my English class in year 10. For the first time in quite a while I thought I could open up. The relief was something else. Crying my eyes out 6 months later when she finally broke down and told me she'd only gone out with me as a dare. Let me tell you, that shit breeds trust issues. My dyspraxia diagnosis, finally an answer to so many questions. Leaving school for the final time and realizing I was free from all the people I couldn't trust. The loneliness hurt, but I'm better for it. The growing cold in my arms as I held my cat Tango after he was put to sleep. 19 years of companionship done. I can still hear his last breath in my mind clear as day. I was determined to be there at the end, as he was there for me during all my troubles. I took him home, and I dug the hole myself, 6 feet deep. I decided that now he was gone, I didn't want to be alone anymore. Sitting in the middle of a field 3,000 miles away from England in the middle of Pennsylvania, surrounded by people I'd met through the internet, raising my beer to my lips and thinking about how I'd be storming the beaches of Normandy in a massive paintball game with them come morning. Looking down at my shirt with our little symbol on it, and looking around at everyone wearing the same. Yeah, that was a good feeling. I'm determined to have more happy memories the next time this question comes around. The following is in chronological order. In terms of significance, I would probably rank them 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. If I think of any additions, I'll edit. Screaming at the top of my lungs in the middle of a music festival because of the first girl I fell in love with as a teenager. We'd gone to a music festival together with 2 others. One of them was my best friend, who had recently become her boyfriend. I was teenaged and angsty about the whole thing. And that night, when they went into their tent together for the night, I wandered off, walked 8 miles through fields and country roads, slept on a bench, and had to be returned to the festival by a kind police officer the next day. Thankfully, we remained friends, and all involved moved on from those feelings. The girl in question is actually sat opposite me now. We're still good friends. My first day on the road of a 3-month road trip. I saved money and used savings to fly to the US aged 18, I'm British, buy a car, and explore for 90 days. In that time, I covered 28 states, over 17,000 miles, and had an absolute blast. The freedom and exciting opportunity of those first few miles was intoxicating. Getting into my dream university. It was my 3rd time round applying to universities, and I'd never got acceptance offers from anything better than my 4th preference. When the letter came, I was away from home, so my dad called me and asked if he should open it. My father was the first person in his family to go to university, and he went to my dream university as well. I love to reminisce about that moment when he screamed, "You got in," over the phone. I just graduated last month, and I absolutely loved the experience. The moment my first girlfriend told me she loved me. This is definitely a bittersweet, yellow-blue memory now, as we broke up last year and don't talk anymore. But that moment, and the thrill not only of saying it back, but feeling it was true, was incredible. The worst moment of my life was a night in which I took a combination of drugs and experienced a trip which scared me in ways I could never have comprehended before. It led to mental health problems and reliance on counseling for about 2 months. That was about 20 months ago, and I'm glad to say I'm much, much better, although it remains a very significant moment in my life. Hopefully it won't remain such a core memory for much longer. My dad taking me for golf lessons as a kid. I sucked so bad at golf and hated every minute, but my dad just wanted a golf buddy. We play best ball now. Golf is really just a nice walk in the woods ruined by sport. During orientation for my current employer more than 10 years ago now, and I remember sitting in the parking ramp before a shift almost being in tears because the job was too stressful and guaranteed to just crap the bed every day. I remember not turning off my car, thinking I could turn around and just go home, or I could keep fighting through it day by day. My first mountain bike ride. I loved whizzing through nature with all those great smells. Thinking back to the first 2 rides, they were so crude compared to how I ride now, picking my bike up to go over some rock or stump, sticking to wide-cut grassy roads instead of deer trails because those were too narrow, not having a clue where I was going or what I was doing. When my daughter was born. Easily the most adrenaline and anxiety-filled day I've lived through. I remember every second of that entire day. Every time I asked the nurse for more coffee, every time I helped my wife to the bathroom during labor, only twice, if you would believe me, were all the nurses. Training nurse, med student, resident, professional, yet there was always a wide and clear exit to the door in case things had to get cutty in surgery. The moment my daughter came out, I remember thinking 2 things. My wife is some kind of superhero person for blowing her business out like that, and for all my life experiences, a fresh newborn baby in the flesh is even grosser than anything else I've ever seen. But the moment she started crying, she became the most beautiful. Funny thing that was. I was on ski vacation in February 2013. I was with my stepbrother, sister, and mother and stepfather. We were in Austria somewhere, and it was my first time skiing. I thought it was going to be boring, but it turned out to become the most memorable vacation of my life. It started out with me, my sister, and my mother having a private ski instructor. My sister and I were decent, and went on to the small slope down some hill. It wasn't that big, but it hurt if you fell. My mom was still behind with that private ski instructor. I went down into the line to get up on the slope of the ski lift. And there I saw her. A girl, roughly my age, and a couple of friends laughing in the back of the line, poking at people's skis. I admired her, and she was simply the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. I got in front of her in the line, and she poked at my skis with her friends. They laughed, but I had not figured out it was them until I turned around to see it. I laughed it off and smiled to her. She smiled back at me. I realized that they were on a school trip from Britain. We immediately began talking about where we were from and what we were doing here. Had a blast and an all-out amazing time with her. Then my family came by the hill and I went for some lunch. I was quite lucky, because she and her friends were also eating at the same place. All I could think about was getting out there and be with her again. The next day, they were there again, and I got to hit it off with her once again. At one point, one of her friends was on the lift with me. She turned to me and said, "You do know she's got a thing for you, right?" I didn't know what this meant, but I figured out that she liked me. Turns out she wanted my phone number, but considering we were from different countries, and I have a weird name, I never got to get any way to contact her. The next day, when I returned to the same place to say goodbye, she was not there. We had ended it all with a hug and a goodbye, but I felt like it was not the end. I never saw her again. My father would get ready for work long before any rooster crowed. My mother, sister, and I were all intimately aware of his moonlit ritual. We slept in the same bedroom, a trait we inherited from his Thai background. A few minutes after the alarm clock sprung him to life, he would let out a long sigh, trudge into the bathroom in his underwear and shower. He moved silently, trying his best not to wake us. Despite his quiet footsteps, I never fell back asleep until the ritual's conclusion. Before leaving to embark on his 2-hour commute into the Bay Area, he'd run his hands through my hair, stroke my meaty face, and kiss me goodbye. It was my father's private way of making me special. He endured this long commute so my sister and I could wake up 3 hours later, take a short walk across the street, and arrive at school. This daily arrangement had one serious downfall. Upon arriving home, after battling hours of gridlocked traffic, he'd have little energy and no patience left for us. I'd beg him to come outside, wrestle around, or play a game of catch with me, but he rarely acquiesced to my pleas. My life at elementary school provided me no productive outlets. My socially graceful 6th grade sister knew everyone who was anyone. In contrast, I spent my recesses meandering around the playground as a dorky 3rd grader. I had spent the better part of a year smitten over a leggy blonde girl named Valerie, and up until this point I possessed little interest in school politics. But when our teacher asked if anyone would be interested in running for office, Valerie's hand had gone up. I instantly saw how these two seemingly divergent interests could intersect if I developed a keen interest in politics. I declared myself a candidate for the hidden purpose of winning a girl's affection. Valerie registered for the position of hostess, therefore I signed up for host to increase the amount of time we would get to spend together. Each candidate had 1 week to campaign, advertise, and prepare a speech on why they should be elected to represent the student body. I developed a rousing speech to secure the student body vote. This being my first venture into public speaking, my grandfather decided to serve as my head speechwriter. After hours of writing, erasing, and rewriting, we came to the conclusion that I should stay away from education instead. I needed to highlight the critical need for longer recesses and lunches. My sister would make the perfect lobbyist, but she didn't want anything to do with me. I couldn't blame her. I'd recently watched the movie Rad and became infatuated with BMX. My mother, trying to satisfy my infatuation, bought me a green BMX sweater. I loved this sweater so much that I decided to wear it to school every day and earned the unflattering nickname Uniform Boy from my classmates. But after a shady backroom meeting I wasn't privy to between my grandfather and sister, he was able to persuade her to publicly admit our blood ties and hired her as a lobbyist. My father was ecstatic with my decision to campaign for office. I had temporarily suspended the old routine of pestering him to play a game of catch after he got home from making his 2-hour commute into the Bay Area. He preferred our new routine where he sat on the couch, ate his dinner, and watched me practice my speech while I stood on stacked yellow book pages in our family room. Election day would be held outside on a sunny California afternoon. My confidence was sky high until I arrived at the school courtyard and beheld a sea of students sitting in neat rows of blue chairs. The hours I had spent practicing in front of my supportive family couldn't have prepared me for speaking in front of hundreds of judgmental peers. I looked down at my piece of paper and mentally rehearsed each word as my sweaty hands smudged out my sloppy handwriting. The only exterior stimulus I took note of were the popular students receiving a loud applause. Unpopular students, my social caste, were shown pity with a polite golf clap. As I heard my name called, a tight knot of nerves formed in my chest. I slinked to the microphone, not tripping on any stairs as I had feared, and started speaking without hesitation. Halfway through my speech, I sensed something was wrong. Most of the audience had puzzled looks on their faces. A few of the older kids, probably led by Keith, were laughing at me. Overwhelmed by my nerves, I hadn't realized the microphone was inches above my head. Nobody had heard a word I said. My first savior was a thoughtful teacher who lowered the microphone and told me to start over. In a panicked moment, I recalled the gravelly voice of my grandfather who said, "Look above the audience if you get nervous." This sage wisdom commanded my eyes to the back of the courtyard, where I found my second savior standing in the shade of a skinny tree with sun-tanned arms resting on his puffed-out chest. It was my father. Same smile he'd used as a nightclub singer in Bangkok to woo my mother. He now unearthed it, years later, to inspire me. I started my speech over and delivered each of my carefully crafted words into the microphone. I felt the syllables and phrases about the dire need for longer lunches erupt from my diaphragm. I looked every one of the older kids in the eye and pounded my fist into the podium to conclude my speech. My lobbyist sister performed her duties admirably as the entire 6th, 7th, and 8th grade roared of voracious approval for longer recesses. My campaign was sparked for Valerie's affection, something I would never win, but ended with a victory of incalculable value: my father's admiration. In the following years, I've won a few more elections, but never felt as happy as I did on that day. I thought this feeling was forever confined to my child memories until I performed my stand-up comedy bit in front of my father for the first time. After telling my best joke of the night, amidst the laughter of the audience, I happened to catch a glimpse of him from a few rows back. The lights were still bright, but I was able to see his crossed arms, puffed-out chest, and radiant smile. He looked, and I felt exactly the same. The time my mom kicked me down the stairs at full force, because of my temper tantrum. I remember my spine hitting the edge of each step that had these metal plates fixed onto the edges of the steps. Luckily, the metal plates were curved, so it wasn't a sharp corner. I also remember the back of my head slamming into the concrete wall at the end of the steps, before you had to take a right down the stairs at full force. I wasn't bleeding as far as I knew, and there wasn't any blood on the wall, so I presumed I was okay. But I also remember seeing my father and brothers sitting on the sofa. My dad was ignoring what had happened and was focused on the TV like it was a daily occurrence, which it was. Whereas my younger brothers saw what happened and was just staring at the scene of what just had transpired. And he had that look that screamed, "That's wrong, but I'm powerless to do anything." At the time, this made me hate the world because I realized even if there are rules and laws in place, people would still break them because who's going to find out? It doesn't matter who breaks the rules. No one would find out if they covered their tracks good enough. It could be anyone. It could be your friends. You, your girlfriend or boyfriend. It could be a relative, or your parents, as it was in my case. It sucks, but that's the reality of it. And it just made me give up on people because they do it because they just don't care. And I was only 6 or 7 at the time of this realization. That's pretty messed up for someone so young. The next core memory of mine would be when this girl I had become friends with as a kid had found out I had loved her. And due to how my parents treated me, I consider my friends like family and loved them to bits with all of my heart. This girl that I was close with. Because I knew her for so long, and I had always hanged out with her, I enjoyed every second of being around her and the experiences I shared with her. When she found out I was in love with her, she decided to fake everything and pretend to be my girlfriend. I know it's childish for 10-year-old children to be doing that sort of stuff, but I didn't care. I really did love her and wanted her to be happy. To make her smile and to enjoy every second we were together. That's sort of love I had back then and still have now. But when I found out about everything, she basically broke my trust and love for her and everyone else. I later on found out my so-called best friend had knew about all of this. When I found out she was toying with me and pretending everything, I couldn't help but break down. The head teacher of the school had to comfort me about it, because I had broke down during our registration session. And what she did was take me away. Not to her office, but to the edge of the school courtyard just next to the grass field everybody could play on during the breaks and lunchtime in the summer. She asked me why I was bawling my eyes out, and I told her why I was crying. She told me that my reason behind my breakdown was childish. At the time, I wasn't able to explain why I felt like this, had to leave out how I was treated at home, otherwise I would have been taken away, which scared me for some reason. I probably had Stockholm Syndrome. This made me never to trust anyone ever again. No matter how much they're nice to me, or how much I loved them. Getting close to people only brought pain and deceit. To myself and to them. I was only 9 when this happened. The last one would be when I was still recovering from that trauma. I was getting better, and then finally getting ready to start hanging out with my friends again, until the class selection for next year's class. I was placed in the lower to middle tier class, whereas all my friends and main group I played with were placed into the higher tier class. I would like to clarify why this is a big deal to me. Because of the way my home environment was, coupled with my hate for my parents, I didn't invite people to my house. And because of that, nobody was willing to invite me around to theirs. This meant outside of school, I wasn't with my friends at all, and my only time together with them was in school. So not only did I not get to spend the first new school year with my friends, I had to recover on my own from what had happened to me, with no one by my side. I remember like 2 or 3 months later, I was walking around the school field on my own during lunch break, and I sat on top of a small hill and I ended up breaking down. It's because I realized how lonely I was and having nobody to comfort me or even to love me. Not even just friends. It hurts. And for a kid, it hits harder than a train. So there I was, sat on top of a small hill, by myself, crying. And I told myself when I'm older, around 18, I said I would have people that would be there for me. People that would love me and help me, and would let me do the same. I would have a girlfriend who's there for me, loves me, smiles with me, laughs with me, worries about me, cares about me, wants to keep me smiling and happy, and knowing I would do the same for her. I knew it was a lie. I knew it wouldn't happen. I knew my experiences that have accumulated at that point would fuck me up mentally, to the point where I wouldn't have any friends, or any of that social and romantic experience, essentially killing my chances to be normal. But I believed in it. I need it, even if it was just a lie. But I was right. I became a social outcast, a loner. Ever since then, I've been doing things by myself. Not because I love it, but because I'm used to it, because I'm used to being alone and feeling lonely, and the disappointment of having people saying they'll be there for me, or will do things with me, when in the end they won't. This is going to get buried, but what the heck? I remember coming home from town with my parents on a Thursday night when I was 4 or 5. We were all dressed up in our raincoats, and we stood in the dark around the answering machine as we got the news that my grandma had had a car accident. The next thing I remember is being at the hospital, although I think that was a few days later. My grandma was on and off a part of my life until she died almost 10 years later. Until I was 16, my family kept horses. We moved because of my dad's work and ended up in a place that, to a civilized horse lover, seems like a hellish pit of torture. Not a good, God-fearing board fence to be seen. My parents did their best, but one day when I was about 14, one of our big, beautiful horses rolled in the mud and got her back hoof-wrapped in the barbed wire. When my mother and I found her, the cut was spurting blood almost comically. We were half a mile from the barn, and my dad wouldn't be home for several hours. My mom panicked at first, then she settled into problem-solving mode. She told me to hold the horse while she got the first aid material. I was almost as afraid as the poor horse. I kept calling back to my mom, wanting to hand her back, but eventually Mom came back with the first aid box. It was one of the only times she ever yelled at me, and she said I have to wrap her leg. I need you to just hold her. Thinking about it, that actually doesn't sound as life-changing as I was setting it up to be. But from that day forward, I've known that I can always do whatever I have to, even if I'm afraid. Also, the horse was okay. She got her hoof stitched back on and she happily derps around someone else's board fences now, looking for new ways to hurt herself. My brothers and I are really close. One of my oldest brothers left to travel the UK for roughly a year while I was in grade 7, but at the time he wasn't sure how long he'd stay for. We called weekly for hours, me telling me how much I missed him. He would then tell me all the cool things he'd done. Toward the end of his trip, he would be too busy to call, and it really upset me. But hey, I knew he was enjoying himself, and that made me happy, at least. The day before my birthday, my stepsister took me out for a skate around the neighborhood. I loved to skate, but I only had my brother's old trick deck to use, cons of being the youngest, and I couldn't do tricks for shit. We must have been out for a couple hours before my dad called and told me my brother was on the phone and had something important to say. I had never skated home faster than that day. I don't know how my stumpy little legs could even push that hard without spontaneously combusting. Anyway, I got home and my brother apologized for not calling lately, but I didn't care. To know he was safe and having a good time was all I cared about, really. Before the call ended, he told me he got something for me while traveling for my birthday. I was so excited I asked him what it was, but as soon as I did, he hung up. This made me really upset, and as I turned to my dad to ask if we could call him back, My brother was standing there in the open doorway, holding a brand new skateboard. The way he said happy birthday while holding back the tears still stays with me to this day. Before age 10, I lived with my single dad. We didn't have much, but he did what he could. I remember this one house we lived in during my second, third grade age. I would walk to school from there, as it was in the same neighborhood. I passed a church on the way home and saw some kids I knew go inside. I followed them, and they were having choir practice for a Christmas play. This was the house on the left, I think. I remember us living on the corner and a house being next door, but it looks like the corner lot is now empty. The church is to the far right. The school is 4 blocks down the street. I put 2 street views together because I couldn't fit both the house and the top of the church in one. In that house, I remember the electricity being off and taking a bath with candles in the bathroom, using some watered-down dish detergent to bathe. I didn't realize at the time it was because we were poor. It had been storming, so I thought the lights were off from that. My sweet dad, he did what he could for us. My older brother by 5 years and I would either go to my dad's auto body shop if he had to work late, or the Boys and Girls Club if he didn't. He would pick us up from there on the way home. There were times he didn't have much business, but he always worked hard and worked for himself if he could. If I went to the Boys and Girls Club, I would get on a bus at our school and be dropped off at the upper school where my brother was. We would walk from there, past a park, and to the center. He was sick one day, but I still went. So on my way to the center, I walked through the park and came across a group having an Easter egg hunt for a daycare center. This was on Good Friday. I remember because I asked why we had to go to school if there were some places closed, too. I saw a dyed, hard-boiled egg they had hidden by a tree, peeled it and ate it. In second grade, I remember him coming into my classroom with 2 grocery bags to our Valentine's Day party. He had brought 2 jugs of red punch and some bakery cookies. I gave him a big hug and was so proud that my dad was at the party. I showed him where I sat, who my friends were, what drawings I had on the wall, and I wanted him to stay all day, but he had to go back to work. I know it wasn't much money in retrospect, probably less than $10, but at that time it was a lot. From the body shop days, the smell of Bondo, making little paper towel ghosts for his waiting room to hang up during Halloween, jumping off of the steps and cutting my knee, finding my first 4-leaf clover in the grassy part out back. My brother and a kid who lived behind the shop riding bikes down a street beside the shop. I was standing in the gravel parking lot behind the shop watching. My brother told me to move, even though I was quite a distance away from the road. Sure enough, his friend jumped the ditch and crashed over the parking barrier right into me. I found the street view of the back of the body shop building http://imgur.com/a/T6T7Y. This all took place almost 30 years ago, and we no longer live in this town, but that's the building. The trailer wasn't there. Then, it's sitting where the grassy part was. The parking barriers are still there. In 8th grade, I wanted to try out for the drill team at school. They did choreographed dances during the pep rallies, like the Rockets. I made the team, but the sponsor teacher coach was really biased to the rich, pretty girls, and not to me and a couple of others who were not rich, pretty, or particularly athletic and thin. She found an excuse to kick me out after my dad had saved up the $500 or so it took for uniforms in camp. He was 30 minutes late picking me up after practice. Another girl had been caught smoking cigarettes behind the bleachers after a game, but she got to stay on because her mom donated money to the team. He told me to go in the truck to wait, and I could hear him yelling. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I knew he was ripping that wretched woman a new one. I had a teacher in 3rd grade, and this was almost 30 years ago, so I don't remember her name. That impacted me like this. I lived with my brother and my single dad. We were poor, very poor. Like take a cold bath in the dark and use dish detergent for shampoo. I didn't have many clothes and often wore the same thing a couple of days in a row because we had to wear something a few times before we were allowed to wash it. They were also kind of small. This teacher, as well as one other female teacher, may have been the counselor, took me during school one day to Walmart or Kmart or somewhere similar. They had me pick out a week's worth of outfits, a pack of underwear and socks, and 2 pairs of shoes. I remember feeling confused when they told me to go in and try them on and come out and show them the outfits. Who does that? I had never tried on clothes before. I just got whatever was given to me at Christmas by my grandparents or dad and wore those most of the year. They made me feel good by applauding and telling me I looked beautiful, and then making sure everything fit properly. After we went to McDonald's, a big treat then, and didn't talk about serious things but about things I liked to do and stuff. I don't think they wanted me to focus on the reason I was being taken shopping by teachers in my situation. I think they wanted me to have a nice time that I never got to experience. When my dad picked me up that afternoon, they came out with my bags. He gave them a hug. I asked him about it a while back, and he said at the parent-teacher conference he and the teacher discussed this, and she was praising my intelligence and creativity. He said he had broke down that day because he had worried about paying bills and buying groceries and said he wished he could do for his kids what they deserved. He knew they were going to do this on their own and was grateful. He kept it a surprise and didn't want me to think about it being charity but a nice time with 2 female adults since I didn't have a mom. I cry thinking about it now, and I always remember those teachers showed this unkempt, probably smelly girl some kindness. My parents divorced when I was little. I was maybe 2 or 3. Dad lived in a major Midwest U.S. city, and Mom in a small town of 300 to 400 people about 45 miles west of the city. Spent every weekend at Dad's. Both parents remarried and Dad had kids with his new wife. We all get along great, and always have. My dad is a truck driver. In 6th grade he calls me at my mom's house and she said I can take the call in her room, which was weird because we just weren't allowed to be in her bedroom. We had no business being in there and I never really cared to be. I pick up the phone and my dad is super excited. He says, "Master Sploder, how would you like to spend your summers with me in Wisconsin?" He had been offered a transfer with work. I vividly remember saying, "Dad, that sounds terrible." I could instantly tell he was kind of disappointed and he tried to convince me it will be a lot of fun. So I just agreed to appease him. Well, moving day comes around over winter break, and there's a bunch of my aunts and uncles helping us move. We all stay at Dad's new house over break, and a huge blizzard comes through, so we had to leave early. I'll never forget him taking me back to the bedroom with just a mattress on the floor and boxes all over, sitting me down and saying, "I love you so much, bud. I'm really excited for you to come back up this summer then," he cried. I had never seen my dad cry before, and it was just a shock. We have a great relationship, and I spent every summer at his house from 6th grade when he moved through college. I'm married now with kids, and we still go up there every summer. That conversation and my big, tough dad crying because he was in a way leaving his son in another state and knew he wouldn't see me as much will always stay with me.